The new Toyota Crown Signia is late to the attainable wagon party. So much so that its closest competitor is probably about to head next door. Drawbacks require context. If I complained about a lack of hot sauce, that could be a valid criticism of a burrito, but not toothpaste. Not everything needs spice, and the Toyota Crown Signia understands that. And so does the Outback. Like the Toyota, the Subaru is still comfortable, spacious, and drives more like a car than a vessel. This is something that you would expect, as both of these vehicles are closely related to sedans. But that is likely going to change for the Subaru in 2026. Rumor has it, it's going to become more blockish to compete squarely against vehicles like the new Honda Passport or perhaps the Hyundai Santa Fe. That is a taller midsize SUV with a confusing identity, but it makes a convincing argument as a luxury adjacent crossover. So, how do the last reasonably priced wagons stack up against a formidable foe?
Formidable? It's a Hyundai. What are you high on, bro?
Have you seen some of the stuff they've made lately?
I don't care if they can spell letters with light bars if they're disposable.
Okay, they've had some issues in the past.
The past?
And some in the present that we'll talk about. But they have some good engines now, and I think you'd be surprised by how many great experiences a lot of their customers have had. Well, I guess we'll talk about that later. Briefly, if you enjoy fun, detailed car content, consider subscribing and hitting the bell for notifications. Thank you. I would also like to thank Royal on the Eastside in Bloomington, Indiana, for letting me test drive the Outback for today's video. The staff are knowledgeable and the store has been serving the community for 55 years. If you're in the market, check them out. The shorter wagon stature has a couple of advantages, like a lower center of gravity and easier access to items on top. The Outback even gives you deployable crossbars, which brings up the first major clash between these two lifted wagons, and that's what they choose to focus on. I asked Toyota if they were benchmarking the Outback, and they replied with essentially Subaru? The Outback was not on their radar because the Signia was supposed to be street-focused and premium. As a result, it doesn't give you as much utility, and there's also a couple inches less of ground clearance and no trick trail modes for the all-wheel drive system, which I'll test how it does in the snow here soon. The Outback offers both a mildly rugged trim and a true-to-form off-road grade, with a lifted suspension, more aggressive final drive ratio, higher clearance bumpers, the whole works. Though any grade will come with plenty of body cladding to protect you from rock chips or looking cool. Jokes aside, I prefer the styling of both of these over the bricked up Hyundai. Over the very boxy Hyundai. Let me know your thoughts. When it comes to features, the Crown Signia is actually the only car to get proximity entry on the rear doors, which is really helpful. And it can also get a 360 view camera. But other than those things, the much cheaper Outback will basically offer the same equipment. And the Hyundai gives you more features across the board, including a standard hands-free power tailgate, available remote crawl function, blind spot cameras, and the letter H. For a little more money, the Toyota does not offer as much as the Hyundai, but that's more of a compliment to the Santa Fe and less of a criticism to the Signia. This is a nice cabin. We've got soft seats that could use more adjustments but are supportive for my 6'3" frame. We have physical HVAC controls. The tech is straightforward. The digital cluster is nicely configurable. I'm not a big fan of these kind of glossy plastics, but the materials tend to be soft. It looks upscale. And even though you do pay for it, every trim is well adorned with things like heated and ventilated front seats, a heated steering wheel, synthetic leather, and the 12-inch touchscreen. Plus, unlike the Outback, you can get a panoramic sunroof. Unfortunately, this does eat in on my headroom. I'm pretty close to hitting the top there, so if you have thicker glutes than myself and you're tall, you might want to skip that option. There's also a punchy JBL sound system that's comparable with the optional Harman Kardon unit in the Subaru, though I don't think it's quite as crispy as the Bose in the Santa Fe. I also think the other two feel a little less claustrophobic. This has a relatively high belt line, the windshield isn't huge, making this feel a little bit smaller than it really is, because make no mistake, this is large. It's about as long as a Toyota Highlander, so I can fit behind myself, no problem. The cargo area is excellent if you want to haul around long items or sleep in it too. You can even flip out a cover for the footwells. The Signia feels like a traveling businessman's cruiser. It's not primarily focused on family use, but it should be able to meet most practical demands. The Subaru Outback feels more at home with people hauling. It starts off by making more room for their stuff. The cargo area is taller and wider without sacrificing the spare tire like the Toyota or hybrid Hyundai. You can even get a full-size spare on a couple of specs. The back seat is also accommodating. And sunroof or not, I'm gonna have more headroom in both rows. In fact, the rear seat here, like the Hyundai, will be able to recline, whereas the Toyota cannot. Up front, the seats come with a firm bottom, but good thigh support, especially with the available extension, and I like the shape. While it does feel like the cheapest car here, there's plenty of padding and soft touch materials for where my knees may rest. I think the accenting is tasteful, and we even get an infotainment time machine. This is dated. The response time and brightness, especially in direct sunlight, remind me of a digital parking meter. Okay, I am being dramatic, at least it does get wireless CarPlay and Android Auto. They didn't fully embed the climate and radio controls, and it's simple. It's just certainly the lowest point of this interior for me. Rumor has it this is getting a major makeover next year. The Outback as a whole might be long in the tooth, but it's a well-rounded crossover wagon that's as nice as a midsize for the price of a compact SUV. If you can stretch your budget, the Crown Signia is more luxurious. You'd be spot on in saying it feels like a budget Lexus. However, the Santa Fe feels like it could go toe-to-toe with the real thing. At least in its top-level calligraphy trim. Here I have authentic feeling wood, great finishes all around, soft leather, and a truthfully ridiculous amount of features. It includes everything that you can get on the other cars, along with a head-up display, 2 wireless chargers, a UV phone cleanser, and an option for power rear seats. Check out my full review for more of its amenities. The seats themselves are highly adjustable up front. Maybe not quite as soft as the Toyotas, but they're supportive. Same goes with the rear seats, which are adult or family friendly. On top of a third row that's actually usable, and even if you go with a lower trim model, these still come well equipped. The base has lumbar adjustment, proximity entry, and remote start. So by no means do you need to spend this much money, but these features are pretty nice. I'd also say the tech features here are better executed than in the Toyota and the Subaru. The infotainment here is the most responsive, even if I'm not a big fan of the digital HVAC controls that don't work if you have gloves on. I also think the infotainment itself is a little far away from the driver, but I think for a lot of people in 2025, those things are forgivable. The comfort, the quality, and the versatility with its countless cubbies and storage compartments, along with the largest cargo area, makes the Santa Fe hard to argue against. And on the road, it becomes an even more difficult challenger for the Outback and Crown Signia. So I'm driving the powertrain that I would recommend, which is the hybrid. It's going to use a 1.6 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder paired up to today's only traditional automatic. You'll have 6 gears here. In between the engine and transmission will be a 60 horsepower electric motor that provides a lot of torque. So when the transmission doesn't need to shift, you have a pretty good response. And while 0 to 60 in the mid 7-second range isn't earth-shattering, this has enough passing power to feel relaxed in most situations. While also getting reasonable gas mileage, the EPA says that you should be able to get around 35 miles per gallon. I haven't quite gotten that, but my conditions this week have been a little less than ideal. The Hyundai is the only car here to make all-wheel drive optional. It's front biased and sends power to the rear when needed, but you can also tell the center clutch pack to simulate a lock. This will send 50% of torque to the rear. It performed well in snow, and its brake vectoring was able to shift power side to side to keep me from being stuck. Ground clearance for real off-roading is limited. For a higher towing capacity and more straight line speed, you could pick the standard 2.5-liter turbo inline-4 mated to an 8-speed dual-clutch automatic. I haven't driven that one yet, but owner reports of severe transmission issues with the 8-speed are another reason to go with the refined hybrid setup. And the ride quality, just like the other two here, is phenomenal. Your small to medium-sized imperfections are smoothed over nicely. Even larger potholes don't really work their way into the cabin. The sacrifice here is that, well, you have a soft suspension and you have up to 4,700 pounds to deal with. So body roll and control here are maybe a little less than ideal, but as we'll talk about here soon, it's not like the Subaru or Toyota are exactly playful either. Plus, up at highway speeds, when you close this really thickly insulated sunroof cover, it is hush quiet. Jumping out of the Santa Fe and into the Crown Signia for a whole week, the biggest thing that I noticed immediately was how much more car-like the Toyota is. This is 400 pounds lighter and it's lower to the ground. This changes direction much quicker, and the suspension still keeps it sure-footed. The steering ratio is also faster with a little bit less weight. It does begin to have some heft, especially in sport mode at higher speed, to the degree where it feels maybe a little bit unnatural. It's also as numb as my toes while filming this video, but I do appreciate its precision. I guess the biggest downside keeping this from feeling athletic is that body roll is present and reporting for duty. But that's as to be expected. I think the important thing here is that it feels more maneuverable than most taller and heavier midsize SUVs. If you want something more engaging, I guess you could go with the much larger Mazda CX-70 or smaller CX-50. But this is much more comfortable than either of those. I was impressed by the Santa Fe, but I think this is even softer over most road imperfections. Even big potholes are just really not a problem here. A stunning feat for a car with 21-inch wheels and no adaptive damping. Though I do think that the Hyundai's powertrain felt more premium. This uses Toyota's latest hybrid system. You have a 2.5-liter naturally aspirated inline-4 and two permanent magnet drive motors, one up front and one around back, which serves as the sole motivator of the rear wheels. This means you have a little over 240 horsepower. It is not fast. 0 to 60 comes up in 7.5 seconds. Just 1/10 ahead of the heavier turbo hybrid Santa Fe. Though the feeling was different. This takes off the line harder. But then the mid-range passing power, I don't think it's quite as potent. It seems like it needs to try a little bit harder. It's still not too labored. I think for a vast majority of people, this is enough juice to work with. But this is really for the person who more so prioritizes fuel economy. This will get 38 miles to the gallon combined, and I've definitely found it to be easier to hit its EPA ratings than the Hyundai, even when both are in sub-ideal conditions. I also think this powertrain does a good job of being seamless. You get some nice initial response from the electric motors, and the eCVT changes the ratio of the engine quickly. It's much more natural than that of the CVTs you'll find in the Subaru Outback. The only thing that I do find a little odd is the brake pedal. It is firm, like weirdly firm. At highway speed, both this and the Santa Fe are quiet, but I would probably give the Hyundai an edge. As the Toyota, you definitely hear more of the engine and maybe a touch more of the road and wind too. Now, I do have some grievances I want to air out about driving the Crown Signia. One of those is the face watching system. And if you get this, you also have front cross traffic alert, which can sometimes get very alarmed by just people crossing the intersection, and most of the time it just raises my anxiety. And I've also found the driver focus system, which is meant to make sure that I'm paying attention, to give me false positives as well. It feels like this has trust issues and frequently believes that you're trying to wreck it. This isn't over the top bad, but it's worth mentioning, and the all-wheel drive system could also be seen as a drawback. It is very front biased. So the Toyota, again, has just a single electric motor powering the rear, whereas the Subaru has a full-time all-wheel drive system with a longitudinally mounted engine that's very quick about sending power to the rear. I tried to accelerate with a little bit of haste on an icy stretch of an abandoned mall parking lot, and without limited slip or torque vectoring diffs, the results between the Outback and Signia were similar. In fact, a brief, unscientific incline test didn't show much of a difference between the two either. I still prefer the Subaru in tricky, more self-inflicted situations for a few reasons. It has more ground clearance, dedicated off-road modes that work well, and the Toyota taps out at 54 ponies on the rear axle. Trying it in deep snow and mud, which shuts off traction control, allows a little bit more wheel spin, it was even tail happy. But when it comes to all-wheel drive systems, most people have pretty high expectations of Subarus. But another reason why I've often given the Outback praise is for its comfort levels at this price point. So how does it stack up against new competition that also costs more? Depending on who you ask, the powertrains of the Outback are either a high point or a low point. I like that you can get a 2.5 liter naturally aspirated Boxer 4. It's simple, it's efficient, and it has enough power for basic needs, but when demands grow, it does begin to feel more wheezy. Expect 0 to 60 in around 9 seconds. If you do want more power, Subaru offers it to you with the 2.4 liter turbocharged Boxer 4. That is going to make 260 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque, while also having the lightest curb weight here. That can get to 60 in under 6 seconds, and passing power is very strong. The drawback is that the turbocharged model will take a big hit in efficiency when compared to the hybrids, something that I wish Subaru offered in this generation, not just for its efficiency, but also for the response. While the naturally aspirated model that I'm driving gets down to business in a reasonable amount of time, there's a lot more delay with the turbocharged model, as it kind of has to wait for turbo lag and the CVT. Toyota's eCVT just reacts quicker, it's smoother, and it feels more direct. While the Subaru powertrains feel more rudimentary, the ride quality does not. This feels like it's in the middle ground of softness. It's going to be very close between this and the Signia in terms of which one is the most forgiving. I think the suspension of this feels maybe a little bit more controlled over tattered and abused pavement, but I mean, it's really down to your taste. I think with the Outback, I feel a little bit more of what the road surface is like, whereas the Signia is a little bit more floaty. And in the Santa Fe, you feel less of the pavement, but potholes are a little more harsh. For me, the Toyota takes the crown on comfort. The Subaru being the smallest car here on a back road, I don't think it really feels any more on its toes than the Crown Signia does. The steering is still pretty quick, but body roll is just as prevalent, and the steering is more vague on center. It's very light and then quickly builds up, and that just makes it feel less natural. Still, I think this is the most approachable car to drive just because the visibility is so good, and the car just doesn't feel as wide even though the dimensions are somewhat similar. When you're at highway speeds, the price tag does begin to show. It's definitely the loudest car here, but compared to most SUVs that cost the same, it is quiet. When it comes to reliability, I get into more of the details on my full reviews. Now, this generation of Outback started selling in 2019. When people ran into issues, most of the time it was related to something like the infotainment, but more and more lately we've been seeing reports of thermal control valves going bad. Rapidly draining batteries and easily cracking windshields are also things some owners have shared qualms over. When it comes to the Santa Fe that was released for the 2024 model year, Its debut, similar to the Outback Turbo, came with some reports of transmission failures, but this time it was more prevalent, and it also just affected the 8-speed dual clutch that you get with the non-hybrids. It's too soon to make conclusions, but this issue does push me to the hybrid even more. Other problems some have encountered during the first model year deal with quality control and the 12-volt battery. The Crown is an all-new model, but it's using a proven engine, and Toyota's consistent hybrid reliability makes me feel much more comfortable recommending it to people who highly prioritize longevity, even if the hybrid battery might need a replacement way down the road. While technically all three of these cars earn the label mid-size crossover, they do things entirely different. The Santa Fe, honestly, that's the one that impressed me the most because the quality was just genuinely great, better than that of the Crown Signia. The tech also worked pretty well, even if I have beef with some of the ergonomics. The hybrid powertrain was also more potent and refined than I was anticipating, and the versatility and clever storage make it even more enticing to families without it being quite the size of something like a Palisade. The Hyundai makes luxury attainable and practical, but I have a couple of reservations. One, compared to these wagons, it feels hefty. And two, even with the best warranty here, the Santa Fe has some work to do before I would recommend it to people that cherish long-term reliability. The Subaru Outback is smaller than the other two, but it really doesn't make you sacrifice interior space. It's also extremely approachable to drive and capable enough to take you far into the wilderness. With the lowest price and strong resale, this is probably the smartest choice here, but it's not my personal pick. While I need to get my own priorities and funding straight before I buy a new daily, the Crown Signia is on my short list. It has the softest ride here, the most efficient powertrain, sharp yet not obnoxious looks, and even the base has the features I care about. The visibility, high entry-level pricing, and just adequate interior packaging will probably keep this from achieving big mainstream success. But if you're looking for a trustworthy, comfortable cruiser with minimal running costs, it's a knockout. Unlike most of my other comparisons, it's hard for me to tell you what wins as my general recommendation between these three. They're all well executed. You can't go wrong here unless you don't know what matters most to you. Thanks for watching, and thank you to my channel members for helping me improve my content. Consider joining for additional videos. I'll catch you in the next one.